The Karate Kid is a now classic 1984 pop culture phenomenon that not only spawned a major following with several sequels in its own time, but whose popularity lives on today in the form of the wildly successful ongoing follow-up series, Cobra Kai. Beyond a few fuzzy memories of having some affection for the movies at a very young age, the Karate Kid franchise was never something I held much nostalgia for over the years. However, with the recent rise of the Cobra Kai TV show, and in anticipation of the new season that's dropped recently, with apparent plans for several more in the future, I decided to take some time, strap in, and fully immerse myself in the Karate Kid universe. After 3 classic movies, 2 attempted revamps, a wacky animated series, and 4 seasons of Cobra Kai, I can tell you coming out of about 35 odd hours of assorted media that the Karate Kid franchise is a fucking trip. What starts off as a relatively grounded 1980s YA underdog story quickly careens off the deep end of having any kind of realistic relatability by the first sequel. From there, we continue to up the ante in some truly bizarre directions over the course of the next several decades before finally arriving at the quirky and engaging franchise revitalization that is Cobra Kai. Through the course of this series of videos, we're going to go through every one of them. But before going off the deep end with millionaires, cartoons, and reboots, let's begin at the one that started it all, 1984's cinematic classic, The Karate Kid. This is part 1 of how the Karate Kid movie franchise was crushed by the weight of its own insanity, only to fully own its ridiculous history and ride that insanity full tilt into the 21st century. 2 quick things to keep in mind before we get started. Number 1, Uncle Louie. Uncle Louie only appears once in the 3rd installment of the Karate Kid franchise, but his legacy would be felt decades later in establishing the overall comedic tone of the Cobra Kai series, as it is in the first film, as Uncle Louie is mentioned in the very first line of dialogue in the entire franchise, possibly in an attempt to subtly establish that the LaRusso family may be of Italian heritage.
Tony, don't forget to tell Uncle Louie that I left the red wine and the Parmesan in the refrigerator, all right?
Number 2, Freddy's t-shirt. Freddy's horrifying Makin' Bacon t-shirt is unfortunately absent from the rest of the series. However, there's a slight nod to it in Cobra Kai Season 2, and the shirts are available for purchase at the actor's fully licensed Etsy store, along with some festive personalized straw clips for every occasion. As for its presence in the franchise, we'll have to appreciate the few fleeting moments of screen time we get of this grossly explicit item of clothing attire in a kid's movie as another subtle indication that this film's premise may in fact take place in the 1980s.
Hey, it's the 80s.
And to many nowadays, the Karate Kid kind of represents an all-encompassing archetype for the overall vibe of the decade, both through its iconic imagery and general aesthetic, as well as its focus on themes of abuse of power, cutthroat competition, and the aggressive commercialization and ruthless capitalistic ideologies that were prevalent at the time, but are no way an issue anymore, because everything's totally fine now, so don't worry about it. Our main story revolves around Daniel LaRusso, the new kid in town who's immediately targeted and mercilessly bullied by a bunch of violent teenage psychopaths for trying to give a girl her radio back. Through striking up a friendship with the maintenance man in his building, Daniel learns the true meaning of karate and is able to overcome adversity, all backed with a sweet 80s rock soundtrack. The central relationship that carries the original trilogy is the bond that's formed between Daniel and his elderly mentor, Mr. Miyagi. Although their relationship initially functions as an unlikely friendship with a student-teacher dynamic, at its heart, the Karate Kid really serves as an idealized representation of a caring surrogate father-son relationship. Both characters, having suffered through personal tragedies and losing people close to them, find in each other the kinship that's been absent in their lives and form a new sort of unconventional familial bond together. Miyagi is reluctant to open himself up at first, but quickly warms up to Daniel and through the course of the year begins to assume all the roles traditionally assigned to a father figure in order to help nurture Daniel through this rough patch in his life. In contrast to this relationship, we're also introduced to Daniel's rival, Johnny Lawrence, and his mentor, John Kreese, who is the leader of his own dojo, whose philosophies are essentially the polar opposite of Miyagi's, which form the central conflict of the film, and also what seems to be one of the main themes communicated throughout the franchise.
No such thing, bad student, only bad teacher.
For most of the movie's runtime, the Cobra Kai students essentially come off as a ravenous horde of over-the-top anime bullies on crack. But as is expertly explored decades later in the Cobra Kai television series, giving a bunch of impressionable teenagers hopped up on hormones and karate a false sense of superiority and a take-no-prisoners mentality is a pretty custom-made breeding ground for creating an army of merciless psychopaths. This becomes abundantly clear towards the end of the movie when basically all of Kreese's students start having some serious reservations about their sensei's insistence on crippling a teenager just to win a karate trophy. In the end, it's pretty clear that Kreese's influence is what led these kids to becoming a pack of ruthless monsters, and Cobra Kai essentially collapses in on itself in the parking lot at the start of the second movie as the students reject Kreese's teachings, and Kreese shows his true colors by trying to just about kill Johnny in broad daylight in front of a crowd of onlookers. The emphasis stated on the importance of a nurturing influence during one's early development also serves to highlight the disparity that can be experienced through class struggle by offering a story that hinges on your main character being gifted an implausible degree of unprecedented opportunities to allow him to even come close to leveling the playing field of his initial circumstances. Because of this well-worn narrative structure, as well as a myriad of similarities in their initial franchise outings, Daniel LaRusso is often likened to a younger version of Rocky Balboa, which is an apt comparison given that both debut films even go so far as to share the same director. But personally, I feel like Daniel has a lot more in common with two characters that are much less likely to garner comparison to the Karate Kid, let alone to each other, those characters being fellow scrappy underdog pop culture contemporaries Charlie Bucket and Peter Parker.
Where'd Spider-Man go?
All three of these characters come from pretty rough situations, being raised in single-income households struggling just to stay afloat. This usually results in a lot of hardships and economic disadvantages that leave our characters often feeling like outsiders from the social norm without much hope of escape. Thankfully, all three of our heroes are lucky enough to have unconventional father figures and would-be mentors to help guide them or offer sagely wisdom, that with great power comes great responsibility, and the importance of being honest with yourself and holding to your principles.
Never put passion before principle.
But their journeys to greatness never really take hold without some divine intervention, a golden ticket, a spider bite, or in Daniel's case, Mr. Miyagi's entire existence. There's no denying that there's a huge level of effort and determination put in by Daniel that is required to reach the levels of mastery he achieves, and the movie goes through great lengths to show it. But Mr. Miyagi's unconventional training methods and secret family karate techniques that have the ability to give a skinny geek who's never even competed in a match until the day of the tournament enough advantage to plow through every competitor and even edge out the reigning champ while injured may as well be akin to gaining a superpower or winning the lottery. At its heart, the Karate Kid hinges on the fantasy of being able to get a leg up in life. The access to guidance, wisdom, and encouragement from a parental figure play a major role in this equation, as do one's own determination and hard work. But in addition to these advantages, many of our most celebrated heroes in pop culture also needed what essentially equates to a miracle to overcome the economic disparity of their situation for even the opportunity to fight on a level playing field. Thankfully, we live in a future where class struggle is a thing of the past and everything's going really well for everybody. So, all's well that ends well. And those are my thoughts on the original 1984 classic, The Karate Kid. I didn't really plan on this short video about a fun 80s YA franchise turning into a meditation on class disparity, but I hope you'll join us as we continue our dive into the Karate Kid franchise in our next entry on The Karate Kid Part 2, where economic struggle is still alive and present, but greatly overshadowed by the abject ridiculousness and premise that becomes a hallmark for all entries to come. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider donating to our Patreon to help us continue making more in the future. And like, subscribe, and share to your friends who you think might like it. Thanks again for watching.